Yeah. I'd like to call this meeting to order, SACOG Transportation Committee meeting for April 4th, 2024. And before doing roll call, I wanted a chance to announce that there's a board member who's attending remotely pursuant to AB 2449.
And Director Jennings, if you can hear me, did you want to make your statement?
I would. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Sorry to my colleagues, but I am participating remotely due to a contagious virus that I did not want any of you to get. And I wanted to make sure that it does prevent in-person attendance. At this point in time, there's no one else in the household but myself. So there will be no one else to hear the meeting other than me.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much. Can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Branscombe?
Yes.
Chapman?
Here.
Guerrero, absent. Howdeshelt, absent. Jennings?
Here.
Joyner?
Here.
Sander?
Here.
Vice Chair Gog?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren?
Here.
Chair Bradford, absent. And ex officio member Aceves?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments for items that are not on the agenda today?
We don't have any public communications.
Excellent. Moving to the consent calendar.
Vice Chair Lauren, if you want to, would you like to do the pledge?
Oh, sorry, so sorry. I would like to ask Director Branscombe to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Branscombe. Moving now to the consent calendar. We only have one item, and it's the minutes from the Transportation Committee meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Do we need to do a roll call vote?
We do. We will need to do a roll call vote for our action items.
All right, roll call vote, please.
Thank you. And then just for the record, there's no public comment. Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Here.
Guerrero, absent. Howdeshelt, absent. Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford is absent. Motion carries.
Thank you. Motion carries. Moving to the action calendar. The first item is programming recommendations for funding of transit route optimization and transit asset management projects with recovered section 5307 discretionary share apportionments. I can't hear.
Can everyone hear me now? Okay. I'll start again. Good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm on the transportation team here at SACOG. Before you today is an item regarding recovered FTA 5307 funds. Late last year, the Federal Transit Administration let SACOG know that some of our federal fiscal year 2020 allocations for FTA 5307 discretionary share funds were actually obligated or made available to our transit operators that applied for those funds. They actually gave them prior federal fiscal year funds from other regions of the country, so those funds did not lapse. This left us a little over $626,000 in FTA 5307 funds from federal fiscal year 2020. So in February of this year, we went to our transit coordinating committee, has our regional transit operators on it, and talked to them about how we could use these funds. They unanimously recommended that we use the funds for two regional projects that SACOG runs for our transit route optimization service that we provide. We provide them software called Remix that they can use for their transit planning and also to support the federal requirements that they have to do regarding transit asset management. And they approved the use of these funds for those purposes and also for the fact that the funds will lapse relatively soon. They'll be lapsed if they aren't obligated by next year. So they wanted SACOG to use those funds, and it benefits all of our regional transit operators. So we're asking today that the Transportation Committee recommend to the board that these recovered FTA 5307 funds from federal fiscal year 2020 for the transit route optimization, Remix, and transit asset management regional projects be programmed for those uses.
Quick question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Just for my own edification, what
Wow.
utilized for transit route optimization and transit asset management? Just quickly, what are those?
The transit asset management is a requirement of the Federal Transit Administration, the federal government, that our transit operators basically keep track of all their assets and their useful lives, and so that they can prioritize replacement of those items or maintenance of them.
Responsible management. Okay.
Yes.
What's the other
And
one?
then the other transit route optimization allows access to, like I said, the software that's called Remix. It has all kinds of information in it that helps our transit operators plan their services.
Thank you.
Of course.
The funds that were recovered,
Mhm.
I don't understand from the staff report, were they recovered at the federal level and redistributed to us, or were they recovered from local agencies?
They were covered at the federal level. The funds that were actually obligated to the operators came from other areas of the country where they were not going to be used and therefore would lapse. So basically the funds are recovered that we basically didn't spend all of our federal fiscal year 2020 funds.
So they're redistributing sort of to everybody,
Yes.
is my guess.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. Do we have other questions? Do you,
Oh, and we're asking for the action today that the Transportation Committee recommend to the board that the funds be reprogrammed for that transit route optimization and for the transit asset management purposes.
Move approval. You want to go to the public first? Oh.
yeah, I would like to take public comment on the item. Does anybody online or anybody in the audience have a public comment for this item?
There's no public comment.
We'll do it again. Move
Seeing no
approval.
public comment, do we have a motion?
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote for the support of this item?
Thank you. Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Guerrero absent, Haudashelt,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye,
and Chair Bradford's absent. Motion carries.
excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving to action item number 3. This is presented by Gregory Chu.
All right, thank you. Greg Chu on the planning staff. I'm also on the funding round team at SACOG and manage the community design grant program. Before you is the city of Winters and the city of Davis have requested a 12-month extension of their community design grant that was awarded in 2021. The program, community design, is to promote implementing the blueprint principles and for projects that are the smallest and need the most flexibility, they receive normally in the form of $100,000 grants, monies using SACOG managed monies, not federal, not state funds. So the guidelines explicitly call for a 3-year award, and there's a possibility for a 12-month extension at the end of those 3 years if the SACOG board approves it. Because they are SACOG managed funds, the request must go through the SACOG board. So SACOG staff is recommending the extension. This is a common thing that has happened in the program every year for the last 15 years. Jurisdictions do request it, staff changes, delays in projects. The reason we do 3 years to start with is to make sure that there's some urgency to it, but we always know that there are reasons why a 4th year is needed. So that is the recommendation from staff.
Thank you very much. Do we have any discussion or clarifying questions on the item? Do we need any comments from the cities? All right, I would be looking for a motion to support.
Second.
Oh, I forgot public comment. Maybe by the 3rd item, I will remember public comment first. If not, yeah. Do
There's
we
no
have public
public
comment
comment.
on the item? No.
No
All right,
public comment.
we have a motion and a second. Can we have roll call vote, please?
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Guerrero absent, Haudashelt,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye,
and Chair Bradford's absent. Motion carries.
thank you. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to item number 4 is authorizing Trails Implementation Strategy and Technical Assistance Request for proposals, and this will be presented by Summer Lopez.
Good morning. My name is Summer Lopez. I am a senior planner on the transportation team, and I actually have the next two items. So this is item number 4. This is an action item on the Trail Implementation Strategy Technical Assistance Program. So a little bit of background, this project really started with the original Regional Trail Network Action Plan, which launched in 2019 and was adopted by the board in 2022. You may know this as Ready, Set, Trails. We are now moving into phase 2, which is the Trails Implementation Strategy and Technical Assistance Program. So an iteration of this RFP did come before the board once before. This was last year. And that RFP was solicited twice, but did not receive sufficient proposals to be competitive. And so the scope has been reimagined and rewritten and improved upon to include a few new components. So the new scope starts with challenges and partnerships. This will be an opportunity to garner feedback from a working group where we will identify key challenges and constraints, as well as necessary partnerships associated with the implementation of the regional trail network. Considerations will include identifying partnerships, risks, and responsibilities. I will note that on most of these items, the consultant or myself will come back before the board to have these discussions and to keep you updated on the progress. The next task is the prioritization, which is built upon the prior plan, and it will be a methodology that will help to develop and identify the top 10 projects with the potential to move forward towards implementation. So the methodology will look at things like complexity, cost, as well as other metrics like connection to destinations, gap closures, as well as safety, equity impacts, and others. The final outcome of the project will be an implementation strategy that will take those top 10 projects and move them towards that next step in implementation. So it'll look at things such as funding strategies as well as cost estimates to help move those projects forward. Technical assistance will be an ongoing effort throughout the entirety of this project, and it will potentially help up to 10 agencies, possibly more, maybe a little less, just depending on the type of assistance needed by the agencies. And the technical assistance will be tailored to each of their specific needs. So it could be things like grant application preparation, cost estimates, assistance with engagement strategies, or maybe even planning, concept design, things like that. And it could be others. So this is just an estimated timeline of the project. It's expected to take about 18 months to complete, with the potential to hopefully kick off this fall. So again, this is an action item. So the recommendation is that the Transportation Committee recommend the board authorize the release of this RFP. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Chair,
Do we have questions? Yes.
I see the scope of work. Do you have a sense of where the price tags will come in on this? Or is that open to proposals?
I'm sorry, did you say price tag? What did you
Yeah,
say?
how much do you think this is going to cost?
Oh, the project is going to be $300,000.
Okay, so it's a fixed price and you're looking for the best proposal within that framework.
Yes, so when looking at the consultants and having them come in for interview, we will be looking at things like, costs and things like that, but also who's going to do the best job and be able to deliver the best project. But that price tag is $300,000.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair.
Thank you.
I might-
Chair recognizes Sudarshan.
So I might have my programs mixed up, but when we were in Woodland recently for the board, we had a presentation on active the transportation,
Active transportation corridors?
yes, thank you. Is this part of that or separate from this?
I can take that question. This is separate from that. This is going to be funded through the carbon reduction program money that the board had taken action on last year as part of the strategy to implement trails and zero emission and other similar projects. So this is separate from the active transportation program, and that's actually the next item that Summer will be presenting, separate.
Director Haddishelt, maybe just for the benefit of the committee too, and I might look to some of the veterans on this committee who have been around, Director Sander and Director Joyner. We developed, actually we sought money and were awarded by Caltrans a grant 4 years ago. And we developed a regional trails plan that connects the entire region with a network of trails. That was just completed. It's a great plan. It gets a lot of attention. People ask lots of questions. I was just at the BIA yesterday. We talked about regional trails network to connect all 6 counties and every community. The question is, now that we have a plan, how do we implement? How do we accelerate implementation of this? Because there are barriers in terms of right-of-way and dealing with some of the owners of those easements. Yuba City, among many others, has these. So this is really about accelerating, and Montmich is having this a plan that sits on a shelf, but actually accelerating the plan, which is definitely something that you all have expressed as a priority. When we go out to all the city councils and boards of supervisors, this is the thing they want to talk about. So this is to really, again, Summer said, we tried a couple of proposals. We didn't, we've rescoped this now, and we think this is going to have better success at attracting proposals.
Thanks.
Thank you. So this is a conceptual, SACOG has a conceptual plan, and we're looking for something to move it forward with all the particulars, timing, execution.
I'd say it's even
whatever.
more than conceptual. All of your cities and counties, but I mean, we actually have a plan of the actual trail network. This is about trying to knock down the barriers and accelerate development of that network.
Okay. And how many groups typically propose on a plan like this?
I'm happy to answer that. So it can vary, but we've actually begun doing some consultant outreach. And so far we have quite a bit of interest. At least 10 consultants are interested in this plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments before I go to public comment?
I'll just say the website's pretty good on the Sacramento Trails.
Thank you.
I have enjoyed looking at it. I'm actually staring at it right now, but I appreciate the progress we've made since the earliest implementation of this to where we are.
Excellent. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
How Shell Mosey, aye.
We have a motion.
Rick Jennings seconds it.
Mr. Jennings seconds. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Guerrero absent, Howdeshell,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford is absent. Motion carries.
Excellent. That's excellent. The next item is item number 5, the Regional Active Transportation Program Policy Framework. And again, we have Summer Lopez.
Queuing up my presentation here. So yes, this is an action item. This is number 5 in your packet on the 2025 Regional Active Transportation Program Policy Framework. So again, the Active Transportation Program is a statewide funding program that is meant to increase walking and bicycling throughout California. And our 6-county regional program is administered through SACOG in partnership with PCTPA and EDCTC. So a quick overview of the program milestones thus far and where we're coming up to what we expect to come up in the next year. The statewide guidelines as well as the statewide call for projects were both launched last month at the CTC meeting. And today I am presenting the final framework for your consideration to recommend for adoption. After the board meeting this month, if it is adopted, then it will go to the CTC for their approval, and it will then go to their June meeting for adoption. The next steps in the process will be the regional call for projects, which will open this summer, likely in June, and then the regional call for projects will close this fall. So as a reminder, there are 2 types of proposed changes that staff is making. The first is administrative changes. The second is a scoring change that would affect the trails scoring. So for administrative changes, it's just meant to really improve the consistency with the statewide guidelines between the regional policy framework and the statewide guidelines. The next is the scoring of trails point distribution. So staff is proposing that the distribution be reduced from 5 points to 3 points, which I'll go over in just a moment. And then just to bring up what we talked about last month, there are no changes being proposed to the disadvantaged community scoring process this cycle. So what did we hear? Last month, this item came as an information item to collect feedback at the Transportation Committee. And we heard that in general, members were supportive of keeping the disadvantaged community scoring for cycle 7 the same. We also heard that there was a desire to keep the emphasis on trails scoring the same as well. We also met with our regional partners and they had similar comments wanting to keep the disadvantaged community scoring for cycle 7 the same. And they did, however, support the reduction of trail points from 5 points to 3 points. And just to give a little background on that, given that the ATP is such a highly competitive program, staff is proposing this reduction because that point gap really can make a very big difference, especially when the funding amounts differ so much from cycle to cycle. So, for example, last cycle, our region received 45 million, and that was due to the IIJA augmentation at the state. This cycle, in comparison, we're getting 15.9 million, so that gap really does make a difference in points. The reduction in points helps to not only decrease that gap from otherwise high-performing non-trail projects, but we feel that keeping the 3 points still shows the commitment and emphasis of importance of trails in the region. So another point on disadvantaged communities, just wanted to mention that there are broader conversations happening for the regional funding round. And because of this, staff is not proposing to make any changes this cycle of the regional ATP. We will revisit this next cycle once some decisions are made for the regional funding round. And at that point, we will either maybe consider aligning with the regional funding round, the way that we score disadvantaged communities in ATP, the regional ATP, or we may consider other options at that point. And as a reminder, this is a every 2-year program, so we'll likely begin that conversation like the end of next year. This is just as a reminder, the scoring process. You can also find this in attachment C of your packet. So the scoring committee is made up of volunteers throughout the region, and this includes folks from local jurisdictions, nonprofits, and CBOs. And then that's in addition to the regional team, which is the SACOG staff, as well as PCTPA and EDCTC staff. So all projects are scored on an initial 95 points, and that evaluation is from the regional framework, which is in attachment A. And then from there, the regional ATP team looks at the trail connection points as well as past performance. And once that process is complete, we then will evaluate to see if a minimum of 40% of the projects provide meaningful benefit to a disadvantaged community. If they do, then the top projects move forward without any additional steps. If they do not, then we would then evaluate up to 10 points to see if the projects provide a meaningful benefit. And we want to hit that 40% threshold. I mentioned this last month. I don't have the chart today, but every cycle historically, the region has exceeded that 40%. So just wanted to make that note. And again, the only proposed changes being made here are related to the administrative changes, which would help us to improve the consistency between the policy framework and then the statewide guidelines, and then just reduction in the points for trails from 5 points to 3 points. So again, this is an action item, and the staff is recommending that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board approve the 2025 Regional ATP Policy Framework. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any clarifying questions? It was an excellent presentation, really
Thank you.
well done. Seeing no questions, do we have public comment on the item?
There's no public comment on this item.
Do we have support for the item?
Hunter Shelton moves the item. Joyner seconds.
We have a first and a second on the floor. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Guerrero absent, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye,
and Chair Bradford is absent. Motion carries.
thank you. I'm going to be moving to the Senate Bill 125 Transit Funding Allocation, and Christina Sven, I'm not sure if I pronounced your, okay, good, I did it, is presenting.
Yes.
Spence. Do it again? Spence. Got it.
It all works. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Lauren. So today in front of you is an action item related to Senate Bill 125, transit funding. As a reminder, in December, we took, thank you, an allocation plan for this, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail. So SB 125, this is essentially a 4-year program through the state to provide funding for transit operators And it was intended to address what was known as the fiscal cliff that many operators were experiencing as a result of the pandemic. It was designed to minimize minimize service impacts or reductions, maintain existing ridership levels or increase them, and also develop a strategy for long-term financial sustainability for regional transit. It is not meant, and this is really important, it is not meant to be a long-term financial or funding source for our transit operators, given that it is only a 4-year program. There's 2 sources that provide funding to this program. There's TIRCP, which is the Transit and Intercity Rail Program, and there is the Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. So you'll see those as what we call TIRCP and ZETCP up there. Over the course of the 4 years, there's a total of about $238 million that is coming to our region. We are currently in the process of continuing to allocate funding from fiscal year 23-24. In the December allocation package, just a quick recap, we did allocate about $45.6 million out. We focused, the board had followed our recommendation to focus on 3 key areas: at-risk capital projects that were seeking TIRCP funding in cycle 7, and near-term planning to address some pandemic ridership losses that some of our operators might be experiencing. Moving forward, we looked at 2 different strategies or 2 different potential options for how we wanted to utilize the remaining fiscal year 23-24 SB 125 funds. After talking to our operators in the region, we found that there was a significant need for operating funding with the remaining funds. There were deficits that were projected for 2 of the operators, and we felt it was really important as a means to maintain consistency with SB 125 regulations to focus on minimizing any kind of impacts to the riding community that we have in our region and preventing any significant service cuts that could be really impactful for passengers and others in the region. So we took a look at 2 different options. Both options assume, as I mentioned, exhausting the remaining funds for just 23-24. We have not yet embarked on the future funds. SAC-RT in assumption 1, I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between the 2. In option 1, the assumption is that SAC-RT would be returning $20 million roughly of funding from contingent awards in December to the pot. Those would be repurposed for other uses for funding out some of the requests that we received from SAC-RT, YOLO TD, and Yuba Sutter Transit. These include a TIRCP match from December that they wanted to actually transfer over to a different program, as well as a strategy of combining some grants that they had received contingent awards for. So they needed less of a grant, so some would be returned to the pot that would be essentially unused. In option 1, we would be able to fund all of the operators' needs that have been requested of us. Option 2, the main difference is that we are not returning any funds from December allocation into the pot. And so therefore, SAC-RT's significant operating deficit would not be able to be fully funded. However, there would be the opportunity to, once we go through the contingent award cycle, so once we go through TRCP or RAISE, which was one of the contingent awards, we would know whether or not those were successful. If they were not successful, funding would be returned to the pot, so to speak, that could be used for allocation in a later plan and potentially could address any outstanding operating needs. So moving forward, we ended up, after thinking and on this and talking with our partners, we made the recommendation to move forward with option 1. Under this option, you can see a little detail there on the screen of what that would actually fund. So we're looking at operating for both SAC-RT and YOLO TD, as well as some grant match funds for SAC-RT and some capital funds for Yuba Sutter Transit. Since SB 125 is intended to aid in preventing drastic service cuts, We really, as I mentioned before, felt it was necessary to focus on operating and address these projected deficits for the next year, as well as some of the important capital needs. And in particular, Yuba Sutter Transit has been working very diligently to get funding for their next gen transit facility. This $10 million award could potentially close that gap for that really important project for our region. So we felt that was a really good match for this allocation cycle. This option, I also want to just draw attention to the funding for SACOG. So there is a 1% administrative allocation that is allowed to be programmed to the RTPA, so SACOG, in order to administer this whole entire program. We are proposing to take the remainder of our 1% allocation. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that this program is done effectively and efficiently for the region. There's monitoring, there's oversight, there's administration, there's reporting that we need to do on a regular basis. There's also a long-term financial forecast that we have to do. This would fund all of that work and allow us to take it now and not have to take it out of subsequent allocation plans. So all of our future allocation plans will be dedicated towards our operators. We also are requiring, if you go back to December, there were 2 awards that were really important. There was a $1 million award to SAC-RT for a comprehensive operations analysis, which is both a short-range and a long-range transit plan. There was also $200,000 given to YOLO TD for a similar plan for short-range transit plan. We are requiring that our operators embark on those studies and begin working on those studies so that they can find efficiencies in their services and find ways to minimize costs and reduce potential budget deficits moving forward. Since this is one-time funding, we cannot continue to rely on this. We need to all work together as a region to figure out how we can make more sustainable transportation and transit in particular in our region. So we are working with our operators to get those underway. We've had recent conversations with SAC-RT about their scope for their COA and plan to be involved in that as that goes forward. So really trying to work within the spirit and intent of SB 125 here and focusing on helping out now so that we don't have major service cuts, but also planning for the long-term financial sustainability of transit in our region. So with that, we are proposing or recommending that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board approve option 1. The details of that, I'm not going to read everything on the screen, but the details of what that action is on there. There's 3 different pieces to it that were in your staff report as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on this item.
Thank you for your thorough presentation. We have questions. Director Sander, did you have your hand up?
I can certainly answer a question. I have not followed the RT budget closely. I understand there's a looming deficit. Could you give us sort of an order of magnitude of how much we're talking about there and what level of fix this is for that problem?
Yeah, I can speak to what we have been given by SAC-RT. I believe SAC-RT is here if they want to elaborate on it. But more specifically, the deficit that we were given was roughly $60.6 million for operating for the next fiscal year. And then on top of that, there were some grant match funds for capital, which is to address state of good repair needs that they have, which, as we all know, if capital is not maintained, service gets impacted as well. So it's a little bit of both. But if you have more specific questions on their actual operating deficit, they're here if you want to ask them.
Okay, maybe I'll take that offline.
I just want to mention
Yeah.
that they do have a slip to speak in just a minute. So
okay. Very good. They might address that.
If it would benefit the board to have SAC-RT do public comment now, we could bring them up. We'll open it for public comment and ask SAC-RT to please come up to the podium.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Chair Lauren and committee. I'm Chris Flores. I'm the Chief of Staff and VP of Real Estate for SAC-RT. I want to thank SACOG staff for working with SAC-RT and other partners on the allocation of this regional SB 125 transit funding. And I want to speak in support of option 1 in the staff report. The California legislature passed SB 125 last summer with a primary intent to help transit agencies that have been hit hard by the pandemic. Specifically, the guidelines prioritize funding to provide a one-time multi-year bridge funding for transit operators to address operational costs until long-term transit sustainability solutions are identified, and to assist transit operators in preventing service cuts and increasing ridership. The staff recommendation in option 1 aligns with the legislature's intent to prioritize funding for the region's riders who are transit dependent and transit agencies that are representing a significant portion of the region's population. SAC-RT has a diverse rider profile within our 440 square mile service area. The majority of SAC-RT riders are transit dependent, with 56% of low-income households and 68% of our riders come from communities of color. 2/3 of SAC-RT riders do not own a car. Prior to Henry Lee's arrival at SAC-RT, nearly all of our 5307 federal funds were being used to support SAC-RT's operations. However, the common transit industry practice is to split this funding 50-50 among capital and operations. Unfortunately, SAC-RT receives only 1/5 of a cent in local sales tax support. That is about approximately 5 times less than many of our transit peers on the West Coast. As a result, our past practices have been use of our federal formula funding for operations. We have been fortunate to turn around our financial situation over the last 5 years, allowing us to allocate a significant amount to our capital program from our 5307. And our goal in the future is to use 5307 federal funds, half for capital and half for operations. This is why this one-time funding is so important to SAC-RT as we work towards a potential 2026 transportation measure that would cover our operating needs and expand our service. But in the meantime, a key goal of our upcoming comprehensive operational analysis is to pursue operational efficiencies, improve productivity without negatively impacting our customers or employee needs. We know the long-term financial sustainability and health of this organization is vital to our community, and I want to thank SACOG for this recommendation, and we look forward to working with them on implementation. And we'd be happy to answer any questions as well.
Do the directors have any questions for Mr. Flores? Yes.
What does the trend line look like the last 5 fiscal years leading up to this fiscal year in terms of a deficit?
I'm going to have our CFO, Jason Johnson, help answer that question.
Because this year's, I think I recall 60 million approximately. Okay.
So
what's the trend line?
So the trend line, so we actually haven't
I
had.
can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Thank you.
So we
Speak up.
actually haven't had an
It's very hard to
operating
hear you.
deficit. Excuse me? You still can't hear me? Okay, this is good now? Okay, sorry. So we actually haven't had a deficit the last 5 years, so there hasn't really been a trend. But we've been filling that gap with federal funds since COVID, since the impact of COVID. So we've had several relief packages that have basically filled any gap that did exist. I don't have those exact numbers, but we've not had an operating deficit because of those funding sources that have been available. And this then extends the additional funding sources to operating for the near term over the next 3 years through SB 125. So that closes those, we're projecting those to close any gaps that we do have in that time frame.
Quickly. So you've had federal funding that's been filling the gap.
Yes,
The federal funding disappeared.
correct. We are
So you
using
became
up the
addicted
last
to-
of that
you-
federal
So
funding in the next
developed
fiscal
a
year.
dependency, addicted is the wrong word, but you developed a dependency for this extra funding and it disappeared and you weren't ready for it.
We've been planning for that. This additional funding through SB 25 was not planned for initially until the last fiscal year.
What would you have done if this didn't come up?
So we do have other federal funds, as Chris mentioned, we've been using in the past, we had used federal 5307 funds for operating purposes. We then shifted those funds to the capital side to meet needs on that end. And then we're able to use the federal funds through the Relief Act, through the COVID Relief Acts, to then cover the operational deficit for those years.
Well, that you've introduced details that are difficult to get into at this forum. But it sounds like one read on this is that you've had this expectation for external funding and it's not as reliable as it was before. Are you making plans for changes in case this funding disappears? Or are you expecting a blank check?
So no, there is a clear understanding of this funding will disappear within the next few years. So we have SB 125 is only going to be funded for approximately 2 more years after this.
And are you making any plans to adapt to the new normal?
So as we go through the COA that was mentioned as well, that's going to be part of that planning process to make a determination as how best to meet those needs in the future.
Now, this is the ultimate discipline for any management team. When circumstances change and the revenue isn't there anymore, you're gonna have to make some choices
Absolutely.
to optimize. And I understand that SACOG is gonna be working with you on that.
Yes, we're working very closely with
I'm very
SACOG on
much in
this.
favor of anything Christina and her team suggest, but you're in a tough position. You need to be resilient, and you're gonna have to make some tough decisions.
All right, the item before us is a specific agenda item, and I think we might get too far in the weeds on the problem, but I want to remind SAC-RT and other transportation agencies that there is very strong language in the packet that should be taken to heart by all transportation agencies to minimize costs, to not be dependent on one-time funding, and to also maintain a sustainable budget. With that said, do we have any other questions for SAC-RT? All right, thank you. Is there any other public comment?
There's no other public
Does
comment.
anybody else dare to have any public comment? Just kidding. All right, we'll be gentle. With that being said, the recommendation from staff is for option number 1. And do we have any more discussion on that item? We know that there's a fiscal cliff for many organizations, and we know that staff has, worked really hard on this item. So I will leave it up to the directors.
I'll move the item.
We have a motion on the floor, and we have a second by Gog. Can we have a roll call vote on this item?
Director Branscombe,
With abundant respect for the transportation staff and best wishes for SAC-RT management, yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Guerrero absent, Haudashelt,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Stander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gog,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
Chair Bradford is absent, motion carries.
All right, thank you very much for your hard work on this item. Appreciate staff's work on it. The next item is an information item, and it's mobility zones programming from Kathleen Hanley.
Yes, good morning, Transportation Committee Directors. I'm Kathleen Hanley. I'm a principal planner on the transportation team here at SACOG. Item 7 is an information item on one of SACOG's new programs called Mobility Zones. So today my presentation is going to provide you an overview of this multi-year project and program. I'll start with some background and give you a sense of what the problem statement that we hope that this program will solve, provide a very high level sense of scope and schedule, and go over the governance of the project, which is quite unique, and how engagement in the 6-county region will work on this project moving forward. And then we'll talk briefly about next steps, including the next time I'll be back to speak to this committee and the board on this program. So recapping where the SACOG Transportation Committee and Board has been on mobility zones, back in March of 2023, the board accepted a $5 million federal Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, or RAISE, grant that SACOG received to fund this new mobility zones program. Then later that year in June, the board adopted a carbon reduction strategy for federal carbon reduction program funding that included listing mobility zones implementation as a priority for that funding in future cycles. So really this 3-year project that's funded by RAISE is setting up our region to be able to make further investments in mobility zones in the long term. Later that year, we were working through federal grant agreements, hiring the project manager, that's me, and also working through consultant procurement to really get this project ready to kick off in January of 2024. And now I'm here in April to provide you an update on the scope of the project and where we're at. So I want to ground the discussion on mobility zones in many of the conversations this committee and board have been having about the triple bottom line goals that have been adopted for the blueprint plan. So as a reminder, the triple bottom line is equity, economy, and environment. And I've pulled some snippets here from the much longer language for each of those terms. So the sort of equity principle is based on working for and with historically marginalized communities. The economy talks about making sure that folks in our region have access to the resources they need so they can live up to their full potential and prosper. And in the environment principle really talks about, preserving what we have, what's great about our region, so that for generations to come, they can have access to those resources. I think at SACOG, a lot of times we talk about the triple bottom line in the kind of slam dunk sense, in the places where we can make an investment in a historically marginalized community that advances the economy and improves the environment. But in a region as diverse as ours, there are a lot of places where it's very difficult to make those types of investments. Places where what advances economic prosperity and gives real folks access to what they need to live sustainable lives isn't always what's best for our environment. And where investments in disadvantaged communities don't always, advance the economy. And so the Mobility Zones is really a project that lets SACOG and its staff and the partners in our region kind of sit with that tension in different places in our region and provides us an opportunity to kind of build a sandbox where we don't have to paint with such a broad stroke brush across 6 counties, where we can, single in on some zones within our region and really understand, okay, what are the exact tensions here and what does it look like to try to achieve a triple bottom line goal outcome in that process? So Mobility Zones is based on 2 kind of problem statements that we see. One is, institutional about SACOG as an organization, and one is about the outcomes for our region. So really right now, SACOG staff generally try to position themselves as the folks who balance that tension between the needs of current and future residents within our region and bring forward a lot of items to this committee and the larger board to try to balance that tension between those 2 needs. But there are a lot of other voices in our region that should be weighing in on some of those decisions and how we balance the scales between the kind of needs of our current residents and the needs of future generations in our region 100 years from now. And so Mobility Zones is really looking at how could we restructure a program and run a program and a project in a way that brings more voices to the table to kind of understand where the tensions are in decision making in our region. In this sort of like nuts and bolts transportation way, the project is looking at the fact that mobility services are really inequitably distributed across the region. There are communities in our region where it's really easy to make active transportation and transit investments that are dense. And oftentimes those are places that continue to receive more competitive grant funding and more resources to further advance those mobility solutions. And there are a lot of parts in our region that are getting left behind, where it's not easy or convenient to use active transportation or transit. And so we sort of like further the gap between where there are good mobility options and where there aren't. And so as Mobility Zones will address these, it's really looking at centering community voices in decision making and creating a framework so that there can be greater community participation in SACOG's work. SACOG staff have had some great examples on a project basis of inviting communities, stuff in the early blueprint outreach that this committee and the board have heard about, things with the EEI, Engage, Empower, Implement framework, but those are really project specific. It's not an ongoing part of SACOG's work. We're not a particular transparent organization in terms of how items come before our committee and to our board. And so Mobility Zones is looking at how could we create a structure to regularly involve community-based organizations in the development of mobility zones? What can we learn from trying that out, piloting it in mobility zones, and how could that inform future SACOG work to ensure communities and community-based organizations are engaged in the work? And then the outcomes from a transportation basis are really focused on making sure that disadvantaged places and people can thrive and have economic sustainability without sacrificing that economic opportunity. So we're not asking folks to switch to transit, where switching to transit means they don't have access to as many jobs, or they can't live in the kind of community they want to live to. How can we make sure that those things are in less tension in parts of our region? So I want to be specific about how this is related to other major projects, because I'm sure I've said a lot of things so far that remind you of other work that SACOG does. So the Engage, Empower, Implement program is a grant program. And so that grant program is a means by which SACOG provides funding to our cities, our counties, and community-based organizations to do this type of co-create community-based planning work. And so the Mobility Zones program will take a lot of the best practices that were developed in Engage, Empower, Implement and implement those for our own program. But Mobility Zones is a SACOG program. What would it look like if SACOG took its own advice on EEI and ran a 6 county-wide type of community-based funding program? I want to be clear that the blueprint and the work that this board and committee will do on the blueprint in terms of setting housing, transportation, greenhouse gas, vehicle miles reduction goals, that's where that work sits for SACOG. And so mobility zones is looking at, okay, we have these goals at a 6-county, 10,000-foot level. What does that mean for a particular neighborhood community in a different part of our region? What can be done to advance those goals? Where is advancing our jobs and housing goal at tension with advancing our greenhouse gas goals within our region? And then on a sort of zone case study basis, the Mobility Zones project builds a lot on Green Means Go. Some key differences are that Green Means Go is housing focused, right? It was an exercise in identifying where are the places in our region where we can concentrate housing investment. And Mobility Zones is looked more at transportation investment instead of housing. And Green Means Go zones were nominated by our cities and our counties, whereas Mobility Zones will be identified using a data-driven and community collaborative process. So we're not like predetermining where the zones will be. The deciding of the zones will be part of the project. So getting into what the overall scope and schedule of the project, this is a 3-year project. It's complicated and long, but at a very high level, there are 4 phases of work. First is the setting of goals and the development of criteria on how we'll make decisions in the future. So what's the project trying to achieve, and how do we measure our progress towards those goals that we're trying to achieve, so that that can inform decisions on where the zones will be and which projects we're going to prioritize within each zone. So once we've set the goals and identified the criteria, then we'll move into the establishing of zones. So what that looks like, if you can imagine sort of overlaying these different criteria across the 6-county region, where are the places that start to kind of light up, that are hotspots of places that have economic prosperity needs, sustainability needs, and equity needs, and establishing about 15 zones across the 6-county region that are roughly neighborhood size, where we'll continue to like focus the rest of the project's work. So once we've identified each of the 15 zones and done an analysis of what's going on within that zone, how is this neighborhood working and what's not working from a transportation perspective, then we'll identify the different projects that are needed within that neighborhood and prioritize those projects based on the goals that were established in the first step of the project. The $5 million raise grant includes $2 million to advance priority projects. So we've reserved some funding to be able to actually move forward projects that have been identified by those communities. So for example, if they wanted, a crosswalk in front of their school to really improve the mobility in that neighborhood, we have some funds set aside that SACOG can do to support that city or county to try to advance that project that's been prioritized by the community. Excuse me. Okay, the project has a complicated governance structure. So I'm going to start on the bottom left with the 2 colored blue and green boxes, which are the committees that guide the progress of this project. So there are 5 community committees, which include nonprofits, community leaders, neighborhood advocates, 1 for each of the counties with Yuba and Sutter combined. And then there's a municipal committee, which includes representatives from all of the cities and the counties within the SACOG region, and a technical committee, which has representatives from the more regional serving folks. So our regional transportation planning agencies, our transit operators, our air districts, utilities, other folks who are related to transportation work and really important in moving things forward, but aren't necessarily tied to one particular county. So these series of committees meets quarterly to discuss the progress of the project, to do things like figure out, okay, within each county, where should the zones be? Okay, now that we have the zones, what projects are we going to prioritize? And then 1 representative from each of the committees rolls up into a project task force that makes sort of decisions and recommendations on, okay, here's what the Yolo County Community Committee nominated in terms of zones in this project. Let's look at what the nominations were from all of the counties and decide, how can we choose 15 zones that represent the diversity of our region. And that work on the committee structure on the left side is supported by a project management team, which includes staff at SACOG, as well as Civic Thread, which is a regional community-based organization that's leading the engagement and outreach for this project and does sort of the direct kind of community and stakeholder or rights holder work. The engagement is broken into sort of 2 types of strategies. Really, those community committees where we have community-based organizations, nonprofits, and community leaders meeting with us quarterly on this project are kind of the core engagement of this project. We get to revisit every quarter and talk about how the project is progressing and make sure that, folks are able to understand what the landscape of transportation funding is like, understand what kind of requirements the region is under, and why certain projects are hard to move forward and other projects are easier to move forward. But we'll also be doing some sort of general public outreach, pop-ups and walk audits, particularly in the zones that we're focusing on, to make sure that folks who don't sit on those community committees are still able to engage with the project. And so the first phase while we're establishing zones is really focused on figuring out where in the region or would make good case studies for us to do this work. And then the second phase of engagement is really focused within those zones. Okay, now that we're focusing down on 15 areas of our region, what does it look like? What are your needs? What projects should we prioritize in this space? So next steps before I open it up to discussion, I included as attachment B to my staff report a list of the community-based organizations that the SACOG staff and Civic Thread team have been working with to get involved in our community committees and otherwise be involved in the project. So for directors who have other organizations they would like us to engage on this process, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I've included my email here on the slide. And then upcoming next milestones in the project, we'll be coming back to provide more kind of concrete updates on how the project is progressing. At the scheduled for the August committee and board cycle is to come back and talk about what the goals of the project are and what types of performance criteria are going to be used to measure those goals. And it won't be until around, January, February of next year that we'll actually be talking about where are those 15 zones proposed for within the region. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. This is just an information item. Thank you.
I hope there's not a quiz. That was really intense. Do we have any questions or comments from the directors? We do have public comment.
I'm trying to figure out what I just heard. And I am. And no disrespect, please. But you covered a lot. And so what is the next step? What are you going to do on your next step?
Sure. At 10,000 foot, we're going to identify 15 zones within our region, neighborhood-sized zones that can serve as a case study to understand, okay, urban, suburban, rural, new development, old development, different parts of our county, and zoom in on those zones to really think deeply about those case studies.
15 zones within the 6 counties.
Exactly right.
That'd be a good spot to have another report and a deeper conversation.
I will absolutely do so.
Thank you.
Do we have other clarifying questions? Yeah.
If I may, very quickly, Kathleen, as you were going through the presentation, you were talking about getting things down to a neighborhood level. But as you just explained, it's going to be looking at urban, suburban, and rural. And I don't hear a role for focusing on the rural within all of this. If you're down to the level of sidewalks to schools, that's not addressing, as you well know, Placer County's rural challenges and El Dorado's and others as well. So how does that fold into this?
Sure, neighborhood's not the best term. And I use it to give folks a sense. I often get the question of how big are these zones going to be? Are they going to be like cities or are they going to be like census tract blocks? And so neighborhood is a good context for urban, suburban, but doesn't do a good job of communicating what we're thinking about for rural. So I think for rural type areas, you can think of sort of how a MAC or a rural community thinks about itself. And so we're going to be drawing the boundaries based on input for those communities. So let's say like a place like Sheridan, becomes a hotspot due to the tremendous transportation and equity issues in a community like Sheridan in Placer County. And then we'd work with the folks within Sheridan to understand, okay, where's a good place for us to draw this polygon? Ultimately a bit arbitrary for rural communities, but like where do you think of as the bounds of your community? So the mobility zones won't all be the exact same square miles, right? Because a neighborhood in an urban area is a contiguous community in an urban area is a lot smaller than a kind of contiguous community in a rural area. And so the sidewalk example is one type of an early action build investment that could be made. I think a bus shelter is a type that might be more appropriate for rural communities that have kind of the one bus stop within their region where they have intercity transit service.
So I think what I'm hearing is many of these projects will be small, but hopefully impactful.
Yes, that's correct.
Is that the intent of the program?
That's the intent of the program. We're going to be open to communities recommending larger things and having a conversation with them about what it would take to get a larger investment done, because we want to reflect the fact that the whole goal of this program and including communities in the conversation is for us to listen a bit more and hear a bit more about what the priorities of communities within our region are, and to be sort of frank with them about like, okay, if you want a 20-mile long shoulder widening project, here's what that costs and here's the years it takes for something like that to move forward.
So because you picked out Sheridan and the example of a bus shelter, there are no buses going to Sheridan.
Right.
So how do we help Sheridan?
And that's the type of question that I would like to get into in this project by picking 15 places. It's very hard for us to have a conversation at 6 counties a lot of time about these types of issues. And so the selection of the 15 zones and this time case study model that mobility zones will use, gives us an opportunity to like dive into those places a bit more and think deeply about the needs of a community like Sheridan.
Director Joyner and the committee, we've had this conversation, I know, quite a bit. I think part of what we're trying to do here is, I think one of the sins of transportation planning is we typically have like 2 or 3 tools that we can offer, right? We can improve your street, we can add a sidewalk, we can put in a bus stop. And we typically come in and think we have the answer. And we don't do a very good job of actually understanding what people's challenges are in terms of mobility. And so this is really intended to try to figure out how can we get more people in different locations and geographies to really begin to tease out those, those problems. Sometimes we don't see a lack of transportation because it doesn't light up anything. Somebody who's not getting to the doctor's appointment or getting into Georgetown or Cool or Placerville in El Dorado County, we typically sometimes don't know about that. So this is trying to flip a little bit of this on its head and see if we can drive some of these challenges and needs from the bottom up. We put the grant forward a couple of years ago with EDCTC and PCTPA specifically because they were interested in these rural challenges. So I don't think we have the answers yet, right? But the idea is to try to flip this a little bit upside down and not always think that we always have the answers, because we don't.
Very interesting. Yes.
Just to play this out a little bit, I could imagine having one of these zones in Rancho Cordova. We have a corridor with below average rent apartments. People there have access to light rail, but frankly, it's still not great mobility for most of the things that they want to do. That could be a focus. We also have the region's second largest concentration of jobs and the region's largest concentration of private sector jobs, which by and large is inaccessible from transit or alternative mechanisms as well. So you could almost argue that would be a regional benefit to somehow enhance access to all those jobs that, by the way, are still growing, not diminishing. So in terms of those two contexts, you're only looking at the former, not the latter, with this project?
No. So I think it's really hard for me to talk about this project until we get to the zones, right? It's such a natural instinct for us to think about places in our region and what their problems are. So I think we'll be able to have a much richer conversation once the zones are starting to be identified. But I think if we take the Rancho Cordova case, for example, let's say that was a zone. Then we do some analysis using the kind of real-time travel data that we have to understand, where do those jobs come from within Rancho Cordova, and do those community members who live within Rancho Cordova travel to those jobs? What is the accessibility of those two things? And so it's travel within the zone, and from a regional perspective, where if there is a regional asset within that zone, how travel to other communities within that zone matters. So it's a bit of both, depending on what the context of the zone is and how much long distance travel that zone creates.
The answer is that entire area could be a zone potential.
Could be.
Okay, second question, might get to the church who's headed with this. So we have the zones, you study the zones, you identify some things that could be done in those zones, then what happens?
Then there's some funding set aside within the RAISE grant that's funding this 3-year work to advance some of those projects within the zones, depending on the cost of those projects. And then the SACOG board has set implementation of mobility zones projects as a priority for federal carbon reduction program funding in future cycles. So it would look like SACOG staff working with the city, the county, the transit operator, whoever is the relevant entity for that kind of project, to see what can be done to bring that project forward through a competitive grant somewhere else, through carbon reduction within our region, just depending on what the project is. So it's sort of what work SACOG can do to kind of get behind the implementation within that zone.
Okay, and the dollars set aside are for planning and engineering, not actually for construction.
So of the $5 million total we received from RAISE, $3 million are set aside for planning and prioritization, and $2 million remain for implementation. So that might look
2 million for the.
right, which is not going to be enough for 15 zones, right? But it might provide critical grant application support, especially to small communities. We might be able to construct some small infrastructure improvements or provide match if a city or a county needs something to help get it over the line. It's enough to start the conversation.
Excellent. Chair recognizes Mr. Hanscom.
You said 12 zones?
15-ish.
15-ish.
Ish.
How did you come up with that number?
So we want a number that is reasonable. And so I think
Why is that reasonable?
I think 1 zone per county is not enough. 5 zones per county is too much. Then we're still back at the like 6,000 foot. We're not focusing in on a knowledgeable enough place, but we're gonna let it. Yep.
And I saw the inputs on defining those zones. Now, those inputs, that'll be a recommendation to this committee and then the board?
So the plan is to have those committee structure, develop draft mobility zones. Then I'll bring that forward to the board for consideration, but I'm also under some discussions with the regional partners on whether it might make sense to go to boards of supervisors or like PCTPA or EDCTC boards itself, so that more, because the zones might not be from the individual who represents that zone might not sit on the SACOG board, but yes.
The questions are to the point that will this have a significant impact within each zone? And would participants within a zone what if there's an objection? I mean, how do you deal with that? How defining is this going to be is what I'm really trying to get at.
How confining is this? How defining for future SACOG work or?
Exactly.
So I think we understand.
No one wants to feel trapped within a zone, if you know what I mean. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm throwing something up on the wall.
You know, I think all you're doing is laying out a process, right? I mean, I'd see the same thing that Chris sees here. You've got a local committee, you've got a technical committee, and then there's going to have to be collaboration. And then there's going to have to be buy-in. And right now, what you're doing is updating us on what the process is, which is pretty robust, right? I mean, we can figure out what the future is, but that's FY 2026, isn't it?
And if I may, there was a heavy emphasis on transit operators in this calculus. Am I correct?
So the technical committee.
Am I correct?
I wouldn't say so. It's one of the types of representatives on the technical committee.
Okay.
Along with air districts. Okay.
We also have public comment on the item. Oh, go ahead.
So will we, because this is robust, I mean, and Kathleen, thank you for concisely and.
I'll make it more concise in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, but the question embedded in all that narrative is, will we get regular updates on this?
Yes.
Thank you, because I think it's going to take several repetitions, because I had very similar questions to what you were asking, and I realized today we're at the starting line, and we got to finish mile 1 first, right?
Well said.
Yep. All right. Thank you for your diligent questions. Can we have public comment? I recognize Glenn Mandel Kern from Questioning ELF Adventures. ELF.
Yes, the whole premise of the questing elf is if he makes everybody else quests easier, then his quests are effortless. So all right. So first of all, my main reason here today is I want to express my I'm thankful for Kathleen Hanley and the 4 attachments she provided. I'm very grateful to SACRT and to Civic Thread, because it's through them that I found out about Mobility Zones project. I found out about this about 10 days ago. So I've been doing a lot of research and reading. And the more I read, the more I liked. I found myself saying repeatedly that I'm getting into the zone. And I kept saying to that, and I said to myself, that sounds familiar. So I said, oh, wow, that sounds like get in the zone, auto zone. But I realized it's not zone, singular, it's plural. So it's get in the zones, mobility zones. Now, I want to emphasize that it's plural because I found the scope of work very captivating and concise in 5 pages. One thing that did grab my attention was that it says that they're looking for a target audience. I would like to change that, propose the target audiences, plural. I was taught in some marketing adventures to focus on target markets, plural, because there's a tendency maybe to over-rely on one market and not be open to several. My reason for bringing this up, of all places, right here at 14th and L, is because we're in downtown. I feel it's symbolic because for a very long time, downtown was like a default transit market. It isn't as much. And so actually, a few years ago when SAC-RT was running their SRTP, during COVID, we discussed the notion of looking for other markets in addition to because people were working remotely, so maybe they weren't coming here all the time. And as a result, they were spending more time in their neighborhoods. And so the curiosity started to develop, okay, how are we going to get around in our neighborhoods? And our mobility zones. So to me, mobility zones represents from one default market to 15 new markets. And that's one reason I'm very much in support of it. It also takes a bottom-up approach to development. Many times when we design something, we tend to think top-down. Bottom-up yields a lot. It builds something organically. Now, like I say, I'm just starting to understand mobility zones. So to me, mobility zones, as I understand it, is more like an intra-county within a county. Now, you here at SACOG, as I have understood SACOG, based on the years I've been studying it, also, again, thanks to SAC-RT to introducing me to the concept and funding, is that SACOG is an inter-county agency. You look over 6 counties. Now, one thing I do want to also respect from that scope of work is that it talked about constraints, okay? It's very important because it's easy to add too many features. And that's why some of what I'm about to say, I'm thinking, and some of you have touched on this, I'd like to suggest maybe on a someday maybe kind of thing. Because I'm envisioning where when there is success within these zones, there'll be the desire to have an inter-county aspect to this. And I like to offer myself as a case study because I live in Citrus Heights and I live very close to the borderline with Placer County. Now, I'm originally from Miami, and also when I moved here to California, anytime I
Sir, that's 3 minutes.
Okay.
If you could please wrap it up.
Okay. Very quickly, what I'm going to say is when I first moved out here, I thought that placer was placer, meaning pleasure. Okay. Now from pleasure, I'd like to bridge to treasure, which is saying I very much value too that the funding aspects were covered in this. My ending words are, I believe that if done correctly, this will be seen as an investment with lasting impact, and that other communities will want to have something like that. And then you can get within zones and between zones. So I very much support this project.
Thank you.
I see it as a win for the many zones.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I just wanted to build a nexus on this of the book that we're all supposed to be reading, that we will have a discussion on, that the chair has asked us for SACOG. What's the date when we will discuss this?
Thursday, May 16th, before your May board meeting, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m.
And
Location to be announced.
so you have about a month, and I would just make the observation that what you have brought to us today is the opposite of many of the things that are described in here. So thank you. Are there any other questions or clarifications on this informational item? Otherwise, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. That was a lot. We have May is Bike Month presentation.
Oh, God. Hi, good morning, committee, Vice Chair Loren. All this talk of starting lines means that it's time to talk about May is Bike Month. To anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Nicole Zeeling Porter. I'm an associate analyst here at SACOG on our transportation team. And for those of you that may not know, every May, residents throughout our 6-county region challenge themselves, friends, and families to replace and swap car trips for bicycle trips as part of our annual May is Bike Month campaign. And since SACOG first launched the campaign in 2004, tens of thousands of residents have participated, challenged one another, and competed quite intensely for a pair of socks that have become very coveted more than any other region that I'm aware of. And the campaign really aims to improve air quality, reduce traffic and vehicles miles traveled, as well as encourage and promote good health and exercise of our region. And in 2022, SACOG, through a competitive process, selected the Sacramento area bicycle advocates, who you may know as SABA, to transition over campaign management of this program to help free up staff time to focus on more sustainable mobility programs within our portfolio. Just as a quick overview, last year's campaign, we actually saw from SABA's efforts a 7% increase in riders from the year prior at about 4,200, just shy of 500,000 miles ridden and more than 37,000 trips made, which I think the exciting piece of that is that 40% of those trips were made for transportation purposes. So that's getting us to those replaced car trips, our reduced VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. And I do want to turn it over. We have the executive director of SABA, Deb Banks, here to talk through this year's campaigns, the events, how you and your community members can get involved. So I will pass it over to her.
Thanks.
It's just this button to go.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for giving us the time to talk to you this morning. I'm Deb Banks, the Executive Director of SABA, and I'm here to talk to you about our May is Bike Month campaign, which is kicking off in, let's see, T-minus 25 days or 26 days. We're excited. So quick overview, who is SABA? How long has May is Bike Month been going on? A little bit more about the campaign itself, who our partners are. We're going to do a little deeper dive on some of the events that we've got going on, and then how you all can get involved. So who is SABA? Our mission: we're dedicated to making the streets safe and convenient for all users, enabling them to take more trips by bicycle, which is a step towards making the Sacramento region a healthier, happier place to live in and work. We actually believe that bicycles can change the world, and we try to do that and bring that forward every single day in all the work that we do. How do we achieve our mission? Advocacy about infrastructure needs. We work with city councils, pushing for different kinds of things that we'd like to see in terms of safe streets for all users. We have services and contracts for Bike Valet, which allows people to ride their bikes, safely park them with us, go to an event, come back, bicycle is safe and sound, and then they can ride home, save their car, leave it in the garage. We also do pop-up bike repair clinics, which allows people who don't own a car because they can't afford one, or they don't need one, or just don't have one. We keep that bicycle in good repair, especially in communities that that don't have a bicycle shop nearby, or can't afford one. We also do a lot of community engagement and education, and Mode Shift. We have a grant from SACOG for Mode Shift work, which we've been doing for the last half a year or so, that has been focusing on e-bike adoption and encouragement and understanding about the e-bike landscape, and May is Bike Month, which is why I'm here. So 20 years ago, there was the Million Mile May, and then it morphed into Bike Commute Month, and then it turned into May is Bike Month. And the amazing thing is that we realized we're looking at 20 years of May is Bike Month, which is really exciting. And on the far right-hand picture, there's a person in there in the bright green vest on, that's Sue Teranishi. She's been a part of every single Emmaus Bike Month and helped even design and think about the original Emmaus Bike Month. We're happy to have Sue on our board, and she is a definite leader along this kind of work. So Emmaus Bike Month is powered by SACOG from the grant that we received from you. From us, we do a lot of fundraising to support this effort, our partners, and then a gaming platform called Love to Ride, which replaced the Three Amigos and the Emmaus Bike Month platform that you all used to use. The idea behind the application, the app, is gamification. You want people to register their rides, log rides, take a ride, ride their bike, and in doing so, you earn a badge, you earn prizes, and we try to support workplaces, clubs, everybody to get in and ride their bikes. Back in the day, when more and more people were, back in the day, that seems like so long ago, pre-COVID, when everybody was in their businesses 5 days a week, we had many more activities that really focused on workplaces, and we've had to broaden that because of COVID, basically. So as Nicole said, the overall campaign is to encourage people to replace their car trips with bike trips. And also when Emmaus Bike Month first started, it was much more along the lines of how many miles can you ride your bike? So a lot of the bike clubs would just, start at midnight and ride their bikes like all day long. Davis Bike Club does things like that. Sierra Foothills Cycling Club does things like that. And when we flipped to car trips, that became a much more inclusive activity so that anybody could ride their bike to the store or to the library and get support for doing that. And that's what we're trying to do, is to make that a habit, to take your bicycle instead of jumping in your car to do something that's only a mile away. So the ways in which we work on this campaign is we have an events calendar, which I'm going to talk about in a second. We have a large social media campaign, and then we have branded promotional materials, also known as swag. So our partners and sponsors, state agencies, regional local governments, UCDs, Cal State, Sac State, et cetera, the TMAs, a number of nonprofits join us, neighborhood associations, all the bike clubs, and then we go out and urge sponsors to come in and provide some extra money to help support all the different events that we do all across the 6-county region. Last year, we had 54 sponsors and partners that took part in the 2023 campaign. And a lot of that goes to pay for swag that then gets distributed out to the 6 counties. We have stickers every year. I'm sorry? I do. You're jumping the gun. What the heck?
The directors need socks. Thank you.
I have socks. You would do the honors, Nicole. Large, extra large, and those are small, mediums, et cetera.
We're gonna get through Deb's presentation first, and
That's
then you'll
right.
get your socks.
You got to listen up first, and
Yeah.
then we give you the socks. Yeah, I know. Behavior modification. I told you this whole thing is about gamification. All right, so we have T-shirts this year that are going to celebrate Emmaus Bike Month. We have stickers every year. The blue bandana is something that we created last year with the ABC Quick Check, which supports people in learning how to fix their bicycles so that they're ride and ready to go and safe. And this year, we took a page from the Ready, Set, Trails work that the transportation team and the crew has been doing. And we are using their logo and map of the region, of the 6-county region, with the trails that are already in existence and then the future ones that are being planned. We have, for me, this was a really important thing. On our new bandana, we have both our logos and SACOG's logos, but I made sure that we put the compass above the SACOG logo because we take we think that SACOG is basically our North Star in this work, and we support that and appreciate it. This year, we're also going to do a Emmaus Bike Month musette bag, and on the back of that, we'll have everybody's logos. And then finally, socks. Shout out to AJ Tendrick from SACOG for designing these socks for us. They've been fabulous. And Nicole and I were just chatting about it before the meeting. It's amazing how much what they'll do for a pair of socks. It's incredible. All right. All right. Our events calendar. We already have 40 plus events on the calendar. and throughout the region, including, and I'm not going to read everybody, I hope that you can find cities and locations and communities there that represent you. We've really done an extra push this year because Sacramento is very, we are housed in Sacramento, and it's the largest area that participates in May is Bike Month, but we've made really strong pushes to reach out to other areas. So we've got things that are going on in Placer County. We have things that are going on outside in Woodland, all the way up into Lake Tahoe, in Folsom, in Auburn, in Marysville with the Blue Zones project. So we're really, really trying to do more things out and about. And yet, Sacramento and Saba also puts on our own set of Mayor's Bike Month events. And they start on April 28th in West Sacramento, partnering with Breathe California. We're having a kickoff event there. Hope to see you all there in your socks. On May 2nd, we are doing a screening called Biking While Black. It's an advocacy piece about how difficult it is for people of color and with less means who live in our disadvantaged neighborhoods and the kind of experience they have riding their bicycles. The screening of this is coming from Southern California. The director, Yolanda Overstreet Davis, will be with us. It's going to be a really important evening. We're going to have a bike shop, a bike swap, and a sale and a show the next month or the next week. And then bunch of Energizer stations, et cetera. We're going to have some cargo races for e-bikes, et cetera. And we always run a social ride that we partner with SAC-RT with, where we ride up to Folsom and then have people take the train back, or they can take the train up to Folsom and ride back because we know it's all downhill from there, or they can ride both ways. One other piece about this is we're going to do a week in the middle of this called Mileage Madness. Back to those folks that used to ride Mayor's Bike Month and just, rack up all the miles. They really felt slighted, actually, when we twisted and turned this on its head to make this more about car trips. So we're inserting a week of what we're calling Mileage Madness. Ride your bike as much as you can, as far as you can, every day. We'll have prizes for you, and we'll rack up a leaderboard on that too. So we got a lot going on, and we want you all to get involved. We want all of your organizations and your distributed network to be involved. Register at mayorsbikemonth.com. Enjoy, a bike ride. Invite your friends. Get your family out there. Log your rides. We have e-bikes for prizes this year, as well as swag from REI and a bunch of other things. That's just really going to be a great year for us with Mayor's Bike Month. And as I said, bikes can change the world, but you got to own one and ride one to do it. All right. Thank you. We hope to see you in May. Questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mrs. Banks. I was wondering, are there any comments, or can we have any public comments on May is Bike Month?
There's no public comment.
I just, I saw that you're doing something with cider, but, it seems like West Sacramento would have a natural with Bike Dog Brewery. Okay.
We're going to be at Bike Dog Brewery, actually the middle of the month. We have an event called Velorama, which includes a number of social bike rides that are all going to convene at Bike Dog. We hope we'll see you there.
And I know, and I just, City of Roseville just sent out its Walk, Bike and Roll, and we have the big event that is very popular.
Yep.
Is there a loaner bike program for folks?
Our organization actually has bicycles that we can that are lightly used, and we make sure that they are safe, and we put them in the hands of people that need bicycles. It's called our Bike Match program. So we don't have a lending library per se, but we're working on that. We're actually working on some funding for some lending libraries so that people could get a fleet of bikes and have them situated where they could just borrow a bike.
And I'll also add to that point that 2 of our recent Mode Shift grants that SACOG recently awarded last year, Deb's organization, Saba, they are putting out an e-bike education and outreach program, and we're looking for some opportunities to collaborate with another grant program that we also funded with the city of Elk Grove. They are going to be piloting an e-bike lending library program. And then there's also, I know, a pilot program in South Sacramento through the Colonial Heights Library, and they're also lending out, I think, for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, an e-bike for residents with a library card.
I will also just jump in and add that we were recipients of some dollars from Assemblymember McCarty for 2 e-bike lending libraries. That'll be in South Natomas and then down in South Oak Park. So those will come online later on this year.
Excellent. Any other comments? Thank you so much. We do have another item that's, basically, we have some announcements today. So, before we move on to the announcements, do we wait to the end for socks? Because I want to make sure we get the socks. Okay. All right. All right. Do we have announcements from the executive director?
Just other matters. I don't think I compete with socks though, so.
I don't know.
I'm a little nervous here. No, all good. Keep handing out socks, Deb. Okay, good. Directors, just a couple of things. Green Means Go. So I got 2 items, Green Means Go and your Denver trip. So if you can, we really encourage you, stay for lunch between noon and 1 and get an update on Green Means Go. But here's the news you can use. As we have announced, and I want to remind you all, the region just won a $22.5 million Reconnecting Communities grant from the Biden administration and US DOT. That was not easy to win. Partly we won that because we had 10 cities and counties join together for a program that you all have put your shoulder into for some time. That's the good news that about a grant award. Many of you are going back for cap to cap, and even if you're not, I want to plant the seed with you for the following. We just submitted, the region submitted a $90+ million grant application to US EPA for what they call their Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, CPRG. In there is over 30 million for capital projects for Green Means Go. When you're back at cap to cap, I don't care what team you're on, this is really important to talk up. And if you need talking points, we can get you those talking points. It's in front, it's been submitted. We had a good meeting, Director Sander and I with the Region 9 administrator a couple of weeks ago on this, but it's a big deal if we can win this. And finally, those are the good news on Green Means Go. The last piece, which I hope you all know and aware of, we are trying to stave off proposed cuts to Green Means Go in the legislature. This funding was awarded in 2021. It doesn't show up on their books, but it is out right now. Many of your jurisdictions have RFPs or bids they've opened or awards they have funded to do water, sewer, and utility upgrades. To stop that work midstream is catastrophic. We had a good Senate budget hearing a couple of weeks ago with Senator Nilo on that committee. We have an Assembly budget hearing coming up on Tuesday. We have letters that have been sent in so far from Senator Nilo, Assemblymember McCarty, Senator Dodd, and Assemblymember Hoover. If your legislator is not on that list, please help us out and let's get our entire delegation in support of this. There was a proposal the last couple of days from the Assembly how to stave off or close the budget deficit that did not include this program, and that's good news. And I think that message is getting across. But as you know, the budget is now between now and really the middle of June. So we need your help on that, so we don't have to basically pull back and the state doesn't pull back the money that you already have and that you're trying to award. That's Green Means Go. A lot more in the lunch. Secondly, just on the Denver trip, I know many of you have been asking about details. We have details and we have flights. So June 26th to 28th, Wednesday, June 26th, departing Sacramento roughly around 3 p.m. It's Wednesday evening, Thursday, Friday afternoon at around 3-ish. You fly back nonstop. Please register by May 10th. The registration link will be sent around either tomorrow or Monday, so you can sign up officially. We have that for board members for $300 all in. So let us know if you have any questions about that or logistics. Again, lots of stuff to see in Denver. We're going to do a big focus on housing. Some of you have been to the Denver tour before, but there's a lot to see and a lot that's even changed since 2017. So those Denver details have been finalized. We'd love to have you on that trip, and more information coming with a registration link. So we are official. With that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just happened to catch this morning, CNBC is doing a Cities of Success. They did Nashville next Thursday. They're doing Denver.
Excellent. Any other additional comments?
James, you might want to forward those comments, potential comments, cap to cap, like lobbying comments out to everyone, because
Sure.
I don't know if we have a list of everybody who's going or not going.
We'll get you the big heavy lift here in the Region 7 county application. Actually, we even have South Lake Tahoe in for Green Means Go because it's all 7 counties, so including the basin. So very excited about that.
Excellent. Very excited about Cap to Cap. Also, thank you for allowing me to be your chair today. The next meeting of the committee will be held on Thursday, May 2nd at 10 a.m. in the SACOG boardroom, and we will adjourn our meeting at 11:45. Thank you.
The Transportation Committee. But we'll go ahead and get started. And Karen, do you want to get the slides up, please? My name is Garrett Balladrosa here at SACOG. I'm the Green Means Go Program Manager. And thank you. I'll have to post her up. How's that? Better? Yeah. Yeah, I'm the Green Means Go program manager here at SACOG. It's my pleasure to give the overview of Green Means Go today. But again, this is meant to be a conversation. I do have a few slides I can get through pretty quick, and we can have a deeper conversation after that, but please feel free to interrupt me at any point with questions. There's 4 things I want to do today. This is really meant to be a Green Means Go trajectory or a Green Means Go 101. Talk about what was the impetus for Green Means Go, sort of the program oranges. What we've been up to the last maybe year and a half, where we're going next, and why your support and sustained support is so critical moving forward. So the background for Green Means Go, and again, Green Means Go is a regional program to think about what we can be doing collectively to accelerate infill, to bring more housing to existing communities, to bring more transportation to existing communities. And we think that has a lot of performance benefits for climate, for the economy, for equity, and a whole quality of life issues. The orange agreements goes a bit broad, but it does stem from a key thing that you consider as the SACOG board each cycle for the blueprint. And how is the region going to meet its 19% per capita greenhouse gas reduction target? Your existing plan does meet that target, and the Lunar Committee this afternoon will be hearing about the blueprint, the next iteration of it, and strategies around that. We know there's a lot of things that go into this, but one of the most effective strategies is at the nexus of transportation and land use. Putting transportation infrastructure in areas with mixes of uses and neighborhood services and jobs and housing all together, right, is one of the most effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see in the prior plan, your currently adopted plan, more than half of the greenhouse gas reduction in that plan comes from that synergy or connection between transportation and land use in an area of mix of communities. Infill or growth in existing communities is one of the most oftentimes effective ways to get at that jobs housing balance, jobs housing fit, the pairing of transportation and land use. We know that we're seeing revitalization and growth across many communities across the region, but we also know that it's not happening in many places. So you see the slide up top, that's actually SACOG's offices right there in the middle. So that's where we are today. You see some cranes around, so you see growth happening. But the slide or the picture on the bottom is just a few miles down the road in Stockman Boulevard in South Sacramento. So again, we talk about the climate benefits of Green Means Go, but it's also a quality of life. These are existing corridors, existing communities that have been underserved, right, that need revitalization and need investment. What's been interesting about Green Means Go is the work that came into the program throughout the region before there was any money behind it, before there was a formal structure behind it. Every single jurisdiction, all 28 in the SACOG region have supported Green Means Go. 26 of the 28 have adopted green zones. These are your locally nominated and adopted areas where you say there is a need for more growth. There's a desire for more growth. There's an appetite for more growth. If that growth comes in, we believe it will be low vehicle miles traveled or low greenhouse gas emissions, right? We're able to show that with the partnership we do with your local agencies, but there are key barriers to seeing that growth happen. So we saw on the prior slide, the Sacramento example. I'll go through a couple more just pictures of green zones throughout the region because of pictures with 1,000 words, right? Of where there's appetite, there's desire, there is momentum, but there's still key challenges. And really Green Means Go about how we can work together to get over that hump and actually get some revitalization in those communities. So the first example of a green zone that's been locally nominated and adopted is Northwood Avenue in Sacramento County, right? A community that's still reeling from the closure of McClellan, even though it's been decades ago. McClellan has been reinvented as a business park. There's a lot of economic activity there, but you can see that the corridor itself, it hasn't necessarily translated up the broader corridor. And so there's a really need for this corridor to revitalize, and Sacramento County staff have put a lot of time and effort into what are the strategies to see that happen. Another example is Bridge Street in Yuba City. If you keep going down that street, right, you'll cross 5th Street Bridge, right? That's the new connection between Yuba City and Marysville. The goal to unlock some economic activity. But again, still challenges to see some revitalization on that part of Yuba City. Another example is in Placer County in North Auburn, an old Army base. Not seen on this slide, but next to this is a lot of where the Placer County Government Center activities happen. There's a master plan in place to make this a more mixed-use community, right? But it needs sort of that next leg moving forward. Final example, Main Street in Woodland. I thought this was a good example given our board meeting in March. this is just a few blocks from where we were. And I don't know how many of you afterwards stayed. A few of our staff went down and had lunch in downtown Woodlands. It's an amazing main street. This is just a few blocks from that great, center of activity, right? It just goes to show the need for these corridors. So the question is, right, there's appetite, there's desire, there's alignment around seeing revitalization and growth in these corridors. It's happening in some places. It's not happening everywhere. The question is why? It's a complex question. We could spend the whole lunch talking about that. This is a complex slide to a complex question. It's not meant to go into each one of these bullet points. Maybe we can focus on the top level themes there. I think the thing to emphasize on this slide is we asked ourselves that very question before even Green Means Go was formed as a program. Green Means Go builds off of multiple years of engagement with developers, with housing groups and for-profit developers, market rate and affordable developers, with economic development practitioners, with your city staff, with city managers, with an array of stakeholders, right? These are their words about some of the key challenges to seeing this infill and corridor revitalization. This next slide sort of takes those themes we see in that list and maybe groups them a bit more easier to see, right? And it's interesting in those conversations we were having, there's not one, there's a lot of different things going on, a lot of different challenges, but one thing that kept rising to the top, one that coming over and over again is what we call the backbone infrastructure. The utilities, the sewer, the water is just not adequate to see the type of revitalization that these corridors need. And what's interesting about this is this was one of the things that there are resources there. There are a lot of people working on these issues, but seemed like there was some disconnect between what the region needed on this one. So it kept rising to the top about that this is a key challenge and maybe not enough is going on in this area as in some of the other areas. That was the impetus of Green Means Go, right? We know there's a lot of performance benefits across the environment, equity, and the economy about revitalizing infill and commercial corridors. We know it's happening in some places. We know there's challenges to see it happen across the whole region. Remember, 28 out of 28 have adopted Green Means Go, 26 have green zones. So Green Means Go is the region's place-based investment strategy, right? How different stakeholders can work together to see the type of vision we have in these green zones. The cornerstone of it is what you see on the left, the infill development. And we want to pair that strategy with the transportation investments as well, travel options and electric vehicles. That would give us the best bang for the buck, especially in meeting our climate goals. I might have lost my clicker. Oh, wait one sec. Karen, could you advance for me or? Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think the next slide is just going to show a list of stakeholders that have been involved. It's actually an outdated slide. I think the thing I wanted to mention is it's a great array of groups. It's environmental groups, it's builders, it's the trades. So it's a great group of stakeholders coming together that might not have come together before. And that really gives us voice when we go and talk to the larger audiences, which we'll be talking about in a second. And then finally, right, that's come together for Green Means Go. Thank you. And then one more slide, I've moved on, right, of how the region can be working with our partners at the local level, in the development community, in the housing groups, right, and also how we can use the program to communicate with a larger voice to our state and federal partners. So you can see there's things that your local jurisdictions have been doing, or can continue to do, and will accelerate doing to try to see this type of development in their green zones. On the policy side, on the zoning side, on the ordinance side, on the permit side, right? And also local revenues that you control being put into those communities. So activity, a lot of activity has been going on at the local level, and it's very much accelerated in the last 5 years or so. What then would be the role for SACOG, right? That was the key question in this Green Means Go regional program, right? The ability to have partnerships. There had been some funding that had been coming through prior to do some planning on sort of the housing land use side. There's also some technical assistance activities we've been doing, rural main streets, commercial corridors, right? All of that was sort of building towards, there's this need for this regional program. That the regional side of it has been really effective recently in that we've been able to talk to a larger audience about, hey, we've got all 28 jurisdictions, right? We have this array of stakeholders across environment, business, labor, And that's been able for us to go and talk about then funding. We see those pictures, right? We see those corridors. We know there's a lot of things that are being done on the policy side. We know there's a lot of things being done on the marketing side, but these corridors need backbone infrastructure improvements too. And so we've been effective in securing 2 rounds of funding. The first for about 35 million to go towards Green Means Go. And then the second, just recently, another 22.5 million. The first was state funding. The second was federal funding. So we've been effective in bringing this funding into our green zones. And this is discretionary funding. It wouldn't have come about except for the partnerships we built through Green Means Go.
What's the funding do?
So great question. I'll get to that. That's the next point. So I'll get to that right now. So activities day and what does the funding do, right? Thank you. You anticipated the next slides. Before I get to what the funding does, I want to reiterate a couple points. First, right, the huge value in the relationship building and stakeholders, it's more difficult to quantify, but the ability to have the partnerships with jurisdictions, housing groups, developers, community-based organizations, right, allows us to move very quickly and allows us to speak with one voice. The second is we've been able to use a small subset of that funding to continue our technical assistance activities to your jurisdictions. So I'll talk in a bit about some Urban Land Institute studies, this Housing Accelerator program, and then the mainstay has been funding for actual green zones and projects. 85% of that has gone to those capital infrastructure projects, sewer upgrades, stormwater, right, facilities that are needed to come into those corridors. We pair that with some planning activities because we know green zones across the region, right, are at a different continuum. Some are just getting started out. Some know there's a need, but they can't specify the explicit capital need yet. So there is some need for some planning activities to get those capital ready. So real quick, just an example of some of the planning work that's been done under the program. We brought ULI out, Urban Land Institute, about a year ago to look at 2 corridors, North Watt in Sacramento County and Bidwell and Folsom. What's exciting about this planning activity is both of those jurisdictions have now been moving forward with scoping out capital projects for those corridors. So again, that's what you always want to see in planning. A planning activity takes place and then it moves forward to understanding the capital need. So those 2 projects have come forward with capital needs and then the grant we can talk about at the end. Here's an example of the Housing Accelerator program we've built up through Green Means Go. This gets us very much at the tactical level, moving from the corridor to the actual individual site. This is actually a parcel in Yuba City. I believe Director Harris, you'll be hearing about this in your own council in about a month, right? Thinking about South Plumas, that parcel, we're able to bring in a consultant and development team to think about, right, what would pencil there and what steps your city could take to actually move forward with a request for proposals, right? And we gave your staff this consultant team gave your staff a couple options of what that housing might look like. So again, an example then of where possible getting down very much into individual sites. And then Director Branscombe, to your main question, the mainstay of the funding has gone to sort of infrastructure planning awards and then to the capital awards. So here's Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights. This is what it looks like today, right? Once the thriving center of sort of Citrus Heights, Orangevale, that part of Sacramento County. We all know the changing nature of retail, right? A physical mall, right? It's really going to struggle moving forward. Citrus Heights has done a lot of work into what they wanted, the vision for that mall moving forward. It's a bold vision. It has a large dollar value needed towards it, right? It needs that backbone infrastructure to realize what they call Sunrise Tomorrow, right? So that's the vision, right? Sunrise today, right? Struggling, Sunrise tomorrow, right? The really meeting place for the entire community. So funding's gone into that project. You said, Director Branson, what else can it do, right? Marysville, right? Is at this. You wanna fast forward that slide? But there's been a real confluence of planning resources coming to that community. Director Branscombe, right? Your staff is taking a specific plan and general plan update, right? Greg can talk about how that was funded in this sort of precursor to Green Means Go, what we call REAP 1, if there's questions. The same ULI technical assistance that Yuba City is receiving, your staff has received, right? And then just recently, Marysville was part of the green zones that were awarded through that federal grant.
So I presume with respect to the old Sunrise Mall, I remember when it was brand new back in the 70s, I think it was just everything.
Yeah.
Now it's not. Are the owners of that property, are they inspired to do this on their own?
So that's a great question. So the ownership is fragmented. If you go back to that slide with a bunch of columns, right? Market, Societal. I think there's 6 or 7 owners, right? And some of it's turned over recently. So I don't think there's a unified ownership voice on it. I
Oh,
think,
of course, okay.
yeah,
There. We've had recent conversations with the ownership group. Good cop and bad cop, guess which one I was? And it's difficult. We're trying to push them off the fence and get them to do something.
yeah, yeah. And I go back into that we saw in that chart with all the colors, right? I think one of them on the market, and it's just, if the owner's not on board, it's really hard to move forward with these type of things. Absolutely. And then finally, the Mather Mills project in Rancho Cordova, right, received a large capital award through Green Means Go and was able to use that award to leverage another state award. And again, this is right next to you at the Gold Line light rail station in this picture, looking across Folsom Boulevard right to the site, right? And as we know, this commercial corridor it's a really tough nut to crack. But Mills Crossing and projects like that, we hope, are the demonstration projects that they can be the domino effect to see more and more type of these projects coming into the region. And you see there's just on Folsom Boulevard itself, there's 20 acres of this vacant land, right? So there's a real opportunity to see that momentum coming forward. So that was really in the year and a half, right? We were able to secure this funding. First time we ever saw this type of funding, we were able to stand up the program, right? We were able to benefit from the sort of relationships that have been built to date, but we moved very quickly. And just recently, we were able to secure that $22.5 million in new federal funds coming to the region. So the question is sort of, that's where we were to date, maybe the first phase of the program, demonstrating Green Means Go, demonstrating, yes, this works in the Sacramento region. Yes, we can work together. What comes next? The Lunar Committee will be talking about this, but I wanted to give a little preview. And maybe it's a bit of an editorializing, but I wanted to start with this of sort of, we know the time frame for infrastructure. We know it's a long time frame, and that's why it's so important to continue the momentum moving forward. Director Grants, yes.
So you want to bring more population into the established footprints, right? Now, are you bringing jobs into those same, in or near those same footprints? Because if you don't do that, you can have people commuting out to Roseville or Folsom or Rancho Cordova, where there's, as you were saying earlier, that's where a lot of new industry is and a lot of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to match them up. Otherwise, you're going to just not create, you're going to have perpetuation of what you see as the same problem now, too much commuting.
Absolutely. And so in the current MTP, the current plan, right, green zones accommodate roughly 1/3 of housing growth and roughly 35 to 40% of jobs. So it very much needs to be both.
Director Branson, I appreciate your questions. And you said, are you bringing jobs in? I think really it's, are we bringing jobs in, right? I want to just remind all of you, these are all nominated by your staff, local jurisdictions, approved. So this is like that, the reason we got the $22.5 million grant just now from the federal USDOT is because we were a team on this. The groundwork has been laid. And all of you this is supporting your general plans and supporting your specific plans. It is still really hard, right? So when we have these conversations about infill is hard, are our assumptions accurate? The answer is, yeah, infill is hard. We're going to put our shoulder into this collectively as a region, which is why this is not a SACOG program. This is a regional program. So I want to put that finer point on, support your general plans, support its implementation to support and actually realize your aspirations, bring more housing and jobs and economic revitalization into these areas.
Right. And so here's a picture of Folsom Boulevard and 65th Street, I think 15 years ago or so. And they did an activity of visioning what it might look like in the future. So this was the vision, right? And then here it is today. So, hey, actually kind of looks the same. I'll maybe do that one more time, right? Here's where it was 15 years ago, right? Here was the vision activity, and here it is today, right? We should have taken it in spring when the trees were all green, but this was a corridor that they've been work going on for 15 plus years, right? There was a lot of activity in place, and you're now just realizing, and actually if you go a little bit west of that photo, there's even more activity there. right? Maybe this is a corridor, farther along that market continuum. We think those corridors we saw early on, right? This is where they get to, but we need that sustained momentum, right? We have that great, 35 million in initial tranche of funding. We have the next 25.5 million coming in, but we know that's a drop in the bucket for the need for, green zones across the region. That's why I need to sustain momentum. So that's the sort of tagline on this next slide. How we sustain momentum and green means go. And then this is what we see on the slide is more of what SACOG staff is going to be doing. It would be great when we end to talk about what else we could be doing collectively as a region to sustain that momentum. First is we have that $34.5 million of funding. We'll talk at the end about the risks of that, but we want to make sure that those projects implement because we want to elevate them and talk about, yes, Green Means Go works in this region. Second, right, we now need to get moving on the next wave of funding, the next $22.5 million that's been brought in, and make sure we're moving quickly on that. And third, we continue to think, are there ways, especially at the federal level, to talk about Green Means Go, because there's a lot of federal grant opportunities out there. We will be doing a convening in the fall. We'll be inviting you all and a broad array of stakeholders around Green Means Go and what's accomplished. I think it's a great way to sort of call attention to the fact, like really in a year and a half, what the region's done collectively, right? Taking a concept, stood it up, and got off and running. That's something we'll be working with our communications team on the fall. And then there's an open question about sort of what's the most effective way that SACOG staff can be supporting your jurisdictions moving forward. Is it technical assistance? We know there's a lot of desire to and need to be working more closely with special districts, the utilities, the sewer, the water agencies. So that's an area that we're exploring right now about what to do next. So SACOG staff's thinking about what we can do. Of course, we know it always helps when there's more funding, right? We're excited about that new $22.5 million coming in. We're exploring other opportunities. But we think on the technical assistance side, on the special district partnership side, there's still ways to be relevant. There's still ways to be carrying this momentum forward. And then why it's critical for you all to continue to be caring about Green Means Go and being champions about Green Means Go in your conversations. First, right, we're so excited about that first round of funding, that $34.5 million in state funding. But those of you who've been tracking, I know Supervisor Desmond, you mentioned this the other day, right? Some of that funding, half of it is at risk, right, in the state budgeting process. Even though these are committed funds, even though we've executed contracts with 100%, we have a contract from the state. We've executed contracts for 100% of those funds to be moving forward on those projects, right? Half of that is potentially at risk due to the state budget. So please, if you get, requests from SACOG, we need all of your voices. Our advocacy and external affairs team are working very hard to communicate the value of this program in our communities and why it really should be the cornerstone of what we're doing forward. It shouldn't be cut, it should be expanded. So just to call attention for those who are not tracking, right, those investments, those awards that you as a board approved last year that we've now executed contracts with to bring that investment in those communities, right, is potentially at risk. We'll need your voice to protect that. We'll also need your voice for those of you that are going to cap, right, to bring that the next wave of Green Means Go funding in. The acronyms on your screen, CPRG, that's a big regional grant that's going into EPA, right? That would fund the next wave of $40 million for all of that would be for capital infrastructure projects for Green Means Go. It's a key priority for the Cap to Cap delegation. For those of you that are on Cap to Cap, read the papers, talk to James, ask any questions you have, and we want to speak with one voice about why this is the solution for the region. Because we know that we need both of those and even the next one to keep this momentum going forward. So again, that was meant to give you just sort of the background of Green Means Go, the origins, what we've been doing, what we think about what's coming next, and then why we need your support. I'm going to stop there. That's all the slides from me, and I want to turn it to any questions or conversations that you may all have.
Well said. Thank you. Huge supporter. I mean, I think that it's exciting what you're doing on what we're doing on Watt Avenue. I mean, it's obviously there is risk involved. It's not a certainty that everything's going to end up like 65th and Folsom, right? I mean, but we are putting everything in place, putting all the pieces in place so it will become that catalyst, right? I mean, that's the idea. But it does behoove I think all of us, and SACOG can't be the answer to all our problems, but it behooves all of us to make sure that we are also attracting employers and making investments in transit to support these areas as well, right? I mean, there's so many moving pieces. I mean, I just had a meeting with our DOT in Sac County the other day and getting really creative with different little funding sources, big, small, and everything in between, looking at CDBG money to help out on that North Watt corridor in certain aspects. So it's tough stuff. And I just want to, I did talk to, Senator Nealo and Senator Ashby, and I think Senator Nealo wrote a letter to the administration. I don't know if Angelique did or not, but I know you have other SACOG folks reaching out to the legislative delegation here, but I mean, that's obviously a big deal, what happens with that REAP money. Have you had any conversations with anybody in the administration? Are you optimistic that all or portion of it might show back up and may revise? I'm not.
I'd hate to be optimistic that we can remove ourselves from the proposed budget cuts. So, but I would say your efforts have really helped. Senator Nealo sent his own letter in because many of you have contacted him. Assemblymember Hoover signed on to the sign-on letter because many of you contacted him. We have McCarty, Assemblymember McCarty, Senator Dodd just signed on. I mentioned this at Transportation Committee, but if you have legislators that are not on that list, actually Aguirre Curry is another, she's in the leadership, but just making sure our delegation understands that is critical. I will tell you too, and thanks to our wonderful team in the back here, Bless Shepard and Christina Lockie, who work our government and public affairs. Of all of you in the room, Marysville and Sacramento County have sent letters, but your other jurisdictions yet have not. And so we have a template. We'll get those to you. But just getting those letters in, understanding the local support. I do think that who knows? I mean, obviously there's a big budget deficit, and we understand that. But I don't think the state realized when they proposed this cut that you all actually had RFPs on the street, that cities and counties were about your opening bids to do real work that creates jobs and creates housing, right? So we're trying to really get that message across. Assembly Budget Subcommittee hearing on Tuesday. We're trying to get as many of our local folks there as possible. So now, between now and the middle of June, whatever you can keep doing, and we'll give you more assignments. But those letters of support, really important. If your legislator's not on that list, assembly member or state senator, really important to reach out to them. I think even I don't want to get too optimistic, right? But I will say, even just the Senate budget hearing a couple of weeks ago, it ended with some, the chair kind of saying, oh, I don't think we understood that this was real money on the street. And Director Sander remembers this. This was 3 years ago now we got this money. So we haven't been sitting on our hands. We've awarded to all of you competitively, and you've all put RFPs out there. So they also have other fund sources, and we have worked with them to suggest there are other even NOFOs out there right now of equivalent amounts that have not even been put on the street yet, right? And awarded. So why take money away from existing proposals and work? So that's the message we're trying to deliver, and your voices and your help and your phone calls and your relationships. This has never been more important. Yeah, Director Lozano.
Yeah, just real quick. Is there a way that we can get a list of those who have signed on? I heard my senator, but I didn't hear my assembly member.
Sure.
And if we need an extra nudge there, that would be great. And then also, I'm going to look for that email. Because I do remember, and I remember forwarding on to staff. I just want to make sure that all the other directors still have that and can still forward it on to their staff.
Yeah.
About the letters of support from the organization.
Yeah. Look, I mean, even just Senator Nealo in the budget hearing and a couple of weeks ago concluded by saying, look, I just want to make sure you all know this is a really tough budget year. However, I've heard a lot from my local jurisdictions about how this cut would be devastating to the implementing our long range plan. This is a huge piece of this implementation. So it makes a difference.
Do we know, it's mentioned there, governor's proposed cut 50%. What are the other proposed cuts? In other words, what's the environment we're operating in if we're going to be advocating? It'd be interesting to know the entire list of his proposed cuts, what those dollar items are, and maybe it could have an impact, a positive impact on how you shape a message going in.
Yeah.
Yeah, our team here, on staff, and then you have your, state advocates, Kiana Valentine and Chris Lee, who often they'll come to the Policy Innovation Committee. Director Desmond sits on that. We're looking through all the proposed cuts. We're trying to come up with creative solutions for them. Again, I don't think there was necessarily an understanding that this money looks like it hasn't been obligated. So it's sitting in some ways looking like it's a balance that you could pull back. I don't think they realized this money is on the street with cities and counties, and you've all got RFPs and bids that you're about to open or have open and are almost about to award, so.
Yeah, we were just confirming, we can get you the list, but it's very broad. Obviously, it's a large number they're trying to make up. And so it is sort of cross-cutting the proposed cuts.
Well, what I'm thinking is Newsom's got a real problem, huge deficit. So he's toughening up like Governor Brown did shortly before he left. And then there's at least a chance that there's going to be change in management in Washington. And a lot of federal money flows through the state on these things. This might be the last chance. There's a possibility that this is the last best chance to gather funding for programs such as this.
Yep.
So that would be the inspiration for being as active as possible now in understanding the environment.
Yeah.
Because there's just a big chance there's going to be a huge change because of what's happening at both the federal and state level in terms of deficits.
Yep. Absolutely. And just to reiterate what James really hit on too, is I don't necessarily think the proposal understood, right? The state's term was these were unspent funds, and we've been very clear in our communications, right? These are committed funds, these are encumbered funds, right? These are on the street. And I think that's going to be a really key part of the messaging. Let's hope so. You heard, sort of SACOG staff sort of perspective, right, on activities moving forward, but I'd be interested too about if the committee or the board has any thoughts too about, Director Sander, we know that the relationship with special districts is critical, right? We're trying, right? We've established that, but I think we're still looking for the there.
Yeah, I think this is sort of externally focused, like who can give us resource to help our problem. Supervisor, you touched a little bit on what we can do internally to try to, work on this problem. But I think there's still a lot of untouched, local opportunity here. I think Proposition 218 might get in our way with regard to some districts, so take regional sand, for example. We can't take general ratepayer dollars from ratepayers in neighborhoods and say, hey, we got to fix this corridor over here. So we're going to take a few cents from you every month and fix that so that other development can occur there. That's not allowed under Prop 218. So special districts like regional sand or water districts are going to have to find revenues elsewhere, like revenues they earn somehow that they can then redirect as they choose that are not subject to Prop 218. But there are lots of these, special district and utility problems that we face. I've told the story before. I think I'll probably tell it again. We had a restaurant on Folsom Boulevard and they wanted to come in and remodel it and make it a new restaurant, a brand that most of you would recognize pretty clearly. They wanted to be on Folsom Boulevard across from light rail. And there was a old Denny's that was basically there, had closed probably 5 years before. It was going to cost them 1.4 million more to go into that site than to go into a greenfield site. And the reason is they needed a grease trap that was 6 inches bigger than the old one because they had a scheduled 1984 grease trap in the ground and it was 6 feet long. And the scheduled 1995 grease trap is 6 feet 6 inches long. Therefore, the old one has to be removed and it's now toxic or whatever. And the new one has to be put in. So that was like a $400,000 problem. That one standard, right? That was not very meaningful when you back up. SMUD said, boy, we don't have the right transformer on that street to power a modern block. You're the first project out of the gate, so you get to buy our new transformer. And the water district, the water agency said, boy, we're going from this size main to this size main on that street. You get to pay for that because you're the first out of the block. And the ADA on the parking area was like 1/4 of a degree off of what the newer standard was. So now you got to rip out all of the pavement and regrade the entire site, which is going to trigger the city saying you got to redo all the sidewalks around the perimeter. And then there's a drainage district issue, right? So when they were done, 1.4 million more, we ended up putting it, I mean, it's a nice place where it is in Rancho Cordova, but it's the wrong place. Should have gone in that original place. And everything we try to do in these green zones hits that barrier of all this stuff. And until we as a region can pull together and say, this is a priority, and we're gonna figure out how to get rid of those sewer fees, water fees, drainage fees, that kill these projects forever, we're gonna have this problem. Doesn't matter how much money we get from the outside. That's gonna be overwhelmed by the demand internally to fix this problem. So I'll give you an example. Regional Sand recently, they've got to deal with SMUD because we generate some electricity. And SMUD says, just use that electricity yourselves, Regional Sand. Just, use it yourself from your solar, et cetera. And then anything extra you need, you'll pay us for. That doesn't give Regional Sand any flexibility in how to spend revenue. So the ideal deal would be Regional Sand, you're generating electricity, sell it to SMUD. SMUD has to change a policy to allow them to do that, a board policy. Then whatever Regional Sand needs, we buy. That little shuffle right there, we think is completely legal, and it will allow Regional Sand now to have revenue from the electricity they generate that they could then say, hey, we got to fix this old corridor over here because it's below our standard. Problem solved. But we have to do that repeatedly through all these different agencies. And all of those independent agencies, and we all serve on them, this is not a goal for any of them. None of them are looking at this problem. They're looking at their own very narrow slice of the pie. They never even think about this bigger issue that we're facing. So I sort of asked myself, who can do this? Who can do this thought? I think it's us in this room. I don't know who else. I don't know who else does that. Chamber's not going to take that on. We're not going to find, we're not going to create a new agency to do it. I think it's this agency. So we're going to tackle those tough things that affect every single one of us because we all have green zones. We all have these old corridors. We all have this exact same problem. I think it's us. And it's probably this agency in this room. Yeah, it's just developers know it's just impossible. Why try?
I would thank you, Director Sandra, because I think that's exactly the kind of rallying cry I know you've been giving for a while. I would say it's both and, right? We both need investment. We lost redevelopment from the state 10 plus years ago, right? And they're making us try to achieve all this greenhouse gas reduction, but they need to invest in us in order to do it because we're willing partners. At the same time, there's, as you say, there's things that we can do locally that are in our control, that are very much in our control. And I would just say too, part of the principle of Green Means Go and green zones was how can you all at a local level really green light the idea of like the green light meaning go, like green light a lot of these development, these infill developments. What else could you do to make it easier to roll out the red carpet? That's the question for the special districts. And it's the question for all of you too. I know in many of your jurisdictions, right, parking minimums is a big deal. I know neighborhood concerns are a big deal, but part of Green Means Go was to try to figure out what you can all in your own powers can do locally. I'm curious if you've had any experience, any, thoughts on that. You tried to push the envelope. It'd be great to hear.
And maybe it might be helpful too to just, Greg Chu, a senior planner who works very closely on Green Means Go and works very closely with jurisdictions, just to share some examples of what James talked about, right? Things that local agencies have been doing, right? There's things that you all can't control, but there are things that actually make a difference. And maybe it's just some that come top of mind, Greg, of recent activity.
Yeah, I mean, in Marysville, quite a bit of effort is going in there on their downtown areas. So they're doing their general plan update, specific plan, and then they're doing an infrastructure analysis. They have the new hospital there, or the revised hospital, a lot of jobs going in there, high-paying jobs, and they're trying to get more housing to come in. They have that old hotel that you saw the picture of the Marysville Hotel that President Roosevelt stayed at years ago. So the city, I know Dan's been working with the city and on behalf of the city and the hospital to get an agreement to provide employees who stay at the hospital or who work at the hospital to be able to stay there. A lot of traveling practitioners come through town, but a lot of them either commute from the Sacramento area or they're traveling and they get paid at a very high rate. We've heard that both for Yuba City, the site that we looked at, as well as for Marysville. Over in Yuba City, we looked at two different sites for specific infill opportunities, both off of Pluma Street, both related to the hospital facilities that are around there. And we interviewed, we did a survey with several hundred Caltrans employees up in the Marysville district, 7 there, as well as the other major employer, which is the hospital itself. And we heard back from what sort of information those employees want. A lot of them do commute from Granite Bay, from Roseville, from Lincoln, from Sacramento. But they want options to be able to stay and to even be closer there. Some of them have no choice because they're on emergency medical services. They're highly specialized professionals that have to be within a 5-minute radius of, if they get a call and it's an emergency, they have to be in the operating room or in the emergency room within 5 minutes. There's nowhere for them to stay right now. They could get a hotel or whatever, but this is every week, every 24/7. Somebody needs to be, some of these very high paying professionals need to be there. So that's what's going on in those 2 cities. In Ileton, we're looking at their downtown. We've got a couple of things going on. In the predecessor to Green Means Go was the REAP 1 grants. They've got some looking at the rental inspection program, and they have a lot of rental units that aren't up to code or up to speed. And then with the Green Means Go program, they're looking at downtown and how there's options for revitalization there and opportunities with their infrastructure. North Watt, we've been working North Watt as long as I've been in SACOG, and a lot has happened there, but we're right at the cusp. The one big thing that we've known about for the last 2 decades is the water infrastructure. There's a lot of stormwater in those areas that can't drain off. And for that reason, a lot of property developers aren't willing to put the money in, just as Director Sander was talking about, is you don't want to be the first one to have to pay for everybody down the line. So the combination of both the Green Means Go, the state grants, as well as the new grant that the federal one that Garrett was talking about, those hopefully will not only study it, but also look to get the engineering work and potentially the construction work going. So we have grants like that throughout. We have 26 grants in Green Means Go from the state side of it, plus another 10 that were just awarded 2 weeks ago from the federal side. Each of those, there's a story behind every one of them about something that the jurisdiction is really needing to happen. The city of Sacramento has 5 grants. We're looking at possibly about 4,000 housing units resulting from those 5 grants. They're in 5 different districts, but they're the critical juncture of the infrastructure. In all cases, either water or stormwater. That seems to be the biggest story with almost uniformly. How do we get there? This is the only program that our jurisdictions tell us all the time. There's no way that they can pay for those things. So this is really the only program that they have that can get us there. Yeah, any questions about specific projects?
I want to add a little comment to that. I think those studies that we did, especially for Marysville and Yuba City, were really helpful for us. And to your point, Director Sanders, one thing that's working out really well is speaking for Sutter County and Marysville, but working with Yuba City and Yuba County as well. The 4 jurisdictions are meeting continuously and following up on those projects and dropping barriers. So like Marysville specifically is changing parking requirements, changing ordinance that, it's been in existence for many years and has frozen the growth and economic development in the city for maybe 50 years, but Yuba City has an economic development person, Marysville has one, Sutter County has one now, and so does Yuba County. And we meet on a continuous basis, and we're working closely with the electeds as well to form policy that will help attract the development and the changes that are occurring through this Green Means Go project, and also through the studies that we learned through ULI. We're really excited because we do have the hospital as a catalyst. We also know of some other potential healthcare developments that are coming down the road into Yuba City specific area, which will be really great to see. And then Sutter County has a Sutter Point growth, which is really close to Sacramento border. So, but I think the help has been from this is getting us to actually work really closely together, and it's interesting for me because I wear two hats, but working for Marysville and being a Sutter County supervisor, and then just being able to work closely with Yuba City, colleagues in Yuba City, and work closely with our colleagues in Yuba County and our colleagues in Marysville too, it's just been great. So it's been very helpful. I would encourage any closer jurisdictions to do that, but obviously using SACOG as the foundation. And then SACOG's been highly supportive to what we're doing. And we have a couple of developer tours coming up in the next few weeks. We've had lots of feature articles in different publications. And so really great forward movement, and all centers around the mission that you have here with SACOG. So good to see.
One of the other interesting projects that we got going on is in Folsom. So we talked about Marysville and Yuba City with how important the Rite Out Hotel or Rite Out Hospital is, and Adventist Health. In Folsom, they have 4 major healthcare providers: UC Davis, Sutter, Kaiser, and Mercy, all within a definable area. And all of a sudden, they have a high need for infill housing, and particularly multifamily housing, because they're going to have a lot of they have 4 times the amount of high-paying jobs that are coming into that area. And just those 4 are willing to do some sort of deal with the city and the transit agency to get people from the light rail to those 4 facilities. So the city's kind of getting ahead of that. They're really working on their objective design standards and their multifamily standards to bring in more infill opportunities immediately near those 4 facilities. They have a lot of growth in their greenfield areas, but they recognize that the only way that they're going to get some of the more products that are affordable to just the staff, the lower paying staff, is by multifamily. So that's their strategy for getting ahead. So they're just taking some planning money, physical construction out of that, but they're able to really leverage that as an opportunity. So that's another example.
Greg, I just wanted to say thank you as well for all your support through that, because you're always on the calls with us all the time. So we appreciate your guidance through it all. With the small cities like ours, it's really, as all of you guys know, it's really challenging to step up to the plate on a lot of these projects without the resources. When we talk about all these exciting things going on in Marysville, and I look around for staff, and I look behind me, there's nobody there. There's maybe one person, and the city manager works really hard, and city council are very dedicated, but the same thing in all of your small communities as well. So having the resource of SACOG there to support is really important. So thank you.
I was told you were going to take questions.
Sure.
Yeah, we make public comment, absolutely. So, first of all, I actually have a comment. I wanted to say thanks because, well, initially I was here for the mobility zones project in the earlier meeting, and then I was told about Green Means Go, and this is actually a bonus for me because I saw that you were on the front page of the Citrus Heights Messenger, and so I got to find out more, and I'm very glad that you gave coverage there to Citrus Heights. The Sunrise Tomorrow project does mean a lot to the residents, and we were very much into it, and then came COVID. So I actually like your map here too. I recognize some of the areas. I happen to be in a neighborhood association that's right along Sylvan and Old Auburn, so, yeah, this area on Auburn Boulevard gets talked a lot, so thank you for that. So that's my comments. There's no but here. Okay. What I am curious about is you had a slide where you said the main barriers to getting a lot of this done is the water and sewage, okay, availability of that. Then you had another point to the right that said transportation and infrastructure safety. Exactly what does that mean?
Great, thank you for your comment. Yeah, I think it's, as Greg said, there's no one sort of, each green zone is going to be different, but you can imagine, right, the transportation infrastructure itself, if there's not sidewalks, if there's not crosswalks, right, that could present a barrier, especially if the goal is to get more people on those corridors by active modes, walking, biking, but if the transportation facilities don't mirror that, that could be a challenge.
So it's a matter of physical condition of roads. Is that mostly okay? I thought of other kinds of safety, like well-being, you know, knowing that local neighborhood. Okay.
Just one the other thing. So you were asking, so on transportation, this agency, we distribute a lot of transportation, federal and state transportation funds, but there's not state and federal transportation funds for sewer and water and stormwater. So this program is unique in that regard.
And you're getting close to your 2 minutes, so if you want to wrap up your comment, please. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, my second question is, I wanted to know, since you brought up Folsom and 65th, I would like to know, is that by any chance related? There is a lot of construction going on further east on Folsom on Ramona Avenue. Is that all a green zone, all interconnected?
We would have to check. So you have the maps in front of you. So yeah.
Yeah, so Ramona has been an area that the city has focused in on to make, it's part of the network to 65th. I don't know if it's specifically technically part of their project there, but that has always been an area for opportunities for new growth, including particularly because it's so close to Sac State. Plus, they have a lot of opportunities for light industrial as well as office. So opening up that.
I see it all very interconnected potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from directors before we? Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate the conversation. Again, we appreciate your continued support for the program. Thanks.